I'm Ibby Syed.
I'm Sean Collins.
And this is Numbers and Narratives.
Hey, Sean. How's it going?
What's up, Ibby?
This is the start of the podcast. All right, should we go through what we want to talk about? I think everyone that's listening, this is going to take a little bit of a different approach than what you're used to. Instead of us interviewing, should we say a third-party guest, I'm going to be interviewing Sean. We're also going to spend some time talking about what we want this podcast to be, how the idea came about, and introducing ourselves a little bit. We realized that we hadn't spent much time actually talking about ourselves, what we do, who we are, and how this came to be. We thought this would be kind of a fun process to start.
Yeah, so who the hell are you, Ibby?
My name is Ibby Syed. I was born... I'm just kidding. I am the founder of a company called Coterra. I used to run data science for retention, growth, and CX at Peloton. That was my last job. A lot of what I did there was try to figure out how to use data to better predict upsell, better predict churn, better predict folks that were having a CX problem. And so when I left, I started a software company alongside my co-founder, Tom Firth, to help businesses of all kinds better understand their customers, figure out where they were in the customer journey, provide personalized experience across marketing channels, and understand their pains and concerns and how to fix them. And so some of the folks that you've heard on the podcast are actually either current customers or partners of Coterra. And we obviously did not start this podcast to talk about that, but they ended up being part of my network and Sean's network. And yeah, a lot of them end up just being very knowledgeable about how to use data to make decisions at scale. And so we thought they would be good podcast guests. Sean, what about you? What are you doing? Give us your life story. Give us your background.
Yeah, so it was April of '89. So I am the VP of Growth Marketing at Bilt Rewards. Bilt Rewards is primarily known as a G2C rewards and loyalty program for renters. And so the idea is that for the longest time, the American dream has theoretically been owning a home, buying a home, and building up wealth through that. But for our generation, buying a home is sort of out of reach, and a lot of people are stuck renting, and you kind of don't. I mean, you get a roof over your head, but there's a lot that you don't get from renting theoretically. There are people who are renting. I say theoretically because there are people who are renting and have incredible places and just don't want to own a home, and that's completely fine too. But so we built a rewards program for renters. You get points on your rent, and you can use those points towards your rent or towards a down payment on a house. And then, the program has really expanded. And so now you can earn points with partner restaurants and with rideshare, like with Lyft, with fitness partners through a lot of other ways. We have hundreds of transfer partners on the travel side. You can use your points to book fitness classes, to get a curated art collection, all sorts of stuff. I mean, it's wild. And it, as I'm a customer, you're a customer.
I love Bilt. I'm gonna talk about Bilt for a hot sec after you're done here.
Yeah, I mean it's so great. Like you truly can't. I mean, you're spending thousands of dollars a month on rent, and now you can use those rent payments to also pay for a trip or for part of a trip, and that's pretty life changing. And then it's also fun because we have a B2B component as well, where we partner with multifamily home and some single family home rental managers. And we give them a rewards program that they can use to build a greater resident experience. And so we also get to do some B2B marketing over here, which is a lot of fun.
Yeah, that Bilt is. I was a customer before Sean and I met, but Bilt is a product I use every single day. It is an app I log into very regularly. There's two reasons why I like it. One, the point system is absolutely bananas. I have 2 other credit cards that because I run a business, like a lot of the things that I naturally buy throughout the day, I probably have a higher sort of credit spend than the average consumer because I, for various reasons, spend a lot of I have to, go out to dinner quite a bit and take clients out, and Bilt is also the credit card I use for a lot of those, sort of like extracurricular business activities. And it's awesome. I have credit cards that I pay for that don't give me as much value as Bilt does. The home ownership piece is actually something that's super cool. I have a friend from childhood. I'm not going to name drop her, but she recently purchased a home, and she actually told me that she used some of her Bilt points towards the down payment on that house, which is absolutely bonkers. That's awesome. I live in New York, and I'm a founder, so my income is not such that I can purchase a home right now.
There's no home ownership for us.
Yeah, no. But she used her Bilt points, and she'd been saving them up I think she'd been a customer for 2 years, and she'd been saving them up for quite a while. And she said it actually made a pretty significant dent in her house buying down payment. I hope that's correct. And yeah, the other part of it is just, at least on a personal level, like the points are great. I kind of like don't want to say this we don't have that many listeners, so like I'll say it anyway, but I haven't paid for like a Hyatt hotel. I haven't paid for a hotel in like over a year. Like the deals that you guys have with various travel partners are so good. I weirdly have become loyal to Hyatt as a hotel chain because of Bilt, because the deals are so good. I'm super happy. I love the product. I think the mission is cool. I think you rarely see the alignment of sort of like a financial product and something that helps in some sort of other, like with the home buying side in some sort of other way. So that's cool. Super, super cool.
Yeah, it's incredible. We have an amazing team over here.
Yeah. Really cool folks. Well, the other couple things that are, I think, interesting to mention is Sean is actually sort of part of the group of folks that we want eventually to gather a listening base from. That's kind of an awkward way of saying it, but fine. He's got a ton of experience. He's got a ton of experience on the marketing side, both for mostly, I guess you're doing B2B. Have you done B2B marketing at other points in your career, Sean, or is this kind of the first go of it?
Yeah, my first job out of the Army, when I founded that or co-founded that company, was all B2B stuff. Right. So Sean has done B2B marketing and B2C marketing both on the e-commerce side and on the mobile applications. I mean, do you refer to Bilt? Do you just like see Bilt similar to how you saw, like, are you still trying to drive similar interactions, or is Bilt fundamentally, you see it as like, financial marketing, and you saw Revel as like consumer app marketing? Yeah, I think there is a distinction. When I started, the app was, like, you had to have the app to get real value. Like our web interface was pretty limited, and what you could do was primarily a marketing page.
Sorry. Say where you're talking about Bilt here.
At Bilt, yeah. Sorry.
Great.
So Revel, you had to have the app. The website was just a website to market to, and for some brand recognition and ads on Google and stuff like that. The app was the way you experienced the product. And so for those who don't know, Revel was, when I got hired there, it was a moped company, electric mopeds, and you could use your app, unlock one, ride where you want to go, end your ride, and just leave the bike there, and someone else would pick it up and take it for the next ride. They have since shut down the mopeds. They've launched an all-electric vehicle rideshare service, so similar to like an Uber or Lyft, but it's all EVs, and all their drivers are employees instead of gig workers. And then they also have a bunch of EV charging infrastructure. But that you needed the app. That's how you unlocked the bikes. That's how you locked the bikes. All that. With Bilt, when I joined, you needed the app to actually be able to do much of anything. We have worked really hard to build near parity And so there's a few features that we restrict to just the app, and that's primarily for like security purposes. But you can do almost everything on web as well. And so the app is really just to enhance user experience and make it easier. Like I would personally rather be in an app than having to log onto a web browser. And so that's kind of the thought, is that it's to make the experience easier for our users.
Yeah. It's a good experience. And Sean, how did the idea for this podcast and us start? We've known each other for a while now.
Yeah, this is the magic of what happens when you respond to cold outreach. So Ibby hit me up, absolutely cold outreach on LinkedIn, I think. And I used to have a rule that I would respond to one piece of cold outreach a month. And Ibby had the best outreach. And so I said, like, yeah, let's chat. We went and grabbed a coffee and had a really fun conversation for a while. It actually started, I think you were giving me a little bit of like career advice, because I was thinking about how do I get better at data. And so you introduced me to a couple people, and we chatted for a while, and that was really great. And we talked about Coursera, and so you gave us kind of a demo, and we signed on as clients of yours for a while. And so we were just working together. I think through mutual interest, we hung out a couple times outside of that work, and had some really fun conversations over some beers, and decided that we should just have those conversations not over beer. And that was this podcast.
Yeah, I think. And what's the goal that we're trying to achieve? So far, we've recorded 7 episodes. This is episode 8, except for, so I think we haven't released 2 of them yet. So at the time of present recording, I think we still have 2 that have yet to be launched. But this will be, you'll have listened to folks from across. Oh, is it 3?
Paul, Amit.
Paul. And Paige. Oh, yeah, it is 3. So this would be, is this? Yes. Okay. Got it. This is 9. That's wild. So this will be the 9th episode that you listen to. And so far you've heard folks from across various industries. We've had mostly consumer. Paige is a software. Paige is software. Selena is software. But most of the other folks that we've had on are marketing. They've been largely retention / lifecycle and customer experience, which we both believe kind of go hand in hand. I think if you're talking to one, there's a lot that the one group can learn from the other. And now it's just us. So Sean, when we originally decided to record these, what was the initial reason why?
Well, I think kind of if you want to take it back to like a thesis or something that professional sounding, there's a lot of people who want to leverage data more on the retention side, on the CX side in particular. And whether it's because they're bogged down with day-to-day tasks, or sort of don't know where to start, or don't have the resources, a lot of what they want to do just sort of ends up on a wish list and never actually gets done. And that means they aren't growing as much, their businesses aren't growing as much, and their customers and users are having less amazing experiences. And so we thought it'd be great to, take these conversations we've had about retention, about customer engagement, about data analysis and automations and personalization, and figure out how we can, talk to people who are doing incredible jobs and have great stories, and give everyone a little bit of inspiration on things they can try, and put it into a format where it's, there's actionable takeaways. We try and usually do things in, whether it's a crawl, walk, run, or a light, medium, advanced, whatever, but like giving you something you could do right now today if you wanted to, and then saying like, and if you really want to do this, like if you want to go all in on this, here's what that could look like, and here's a software, or here's the type of program you'd be looking to build, or something like that.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. The other thing that I guess I would mention is I think both of us come from a background where, due to just who we are as people and the places where we've worked in the past and where we work now, I think tend to err on the side of actionability. I think in the data world, a lot of you have tons and tons of smart folks, right? But a lot of them are largely it's a largely academic field. If you hire a data scientist, oftentimes when you see a job posting, it'll require a PhD, and that tends to bring in folks that are a little more on the academic side. But I think you and I both believe that action is everything, and so focusing on actionability is super, super important. So yeah, that's why we started the podcast. That was what we want to do. And in the vein of that, I think we thought it would be fun to record this episode with me, the rest of this episode with me interviewing Sean on some various things that various types of marketers. I think this advice generally applies to B2B, B2C, and e-commerce. I think we're going to be focusing on testing. But Sean, do you have any? What's your first bit of advice? What's your first if you're taking your years of wisdom across various verticals of marketing? What is some unified advice that you can give to the listeners? And we'll dive into that.
Yeah. I think the first bit that we were talking about what we want to do for this, and I think we're going to try this format out, and if you guys like it, please let us know if this is a format that is enjoyable. We'll certainly continue to have guests on, but thought this could be a little bit of fun too. So when I was jotting down some notes on if I were to try and break testing down to some core principles, the first thing that I think absolutely people need to do is leave no room for second guessing. And what I mean by that is, in my experience, whenever people want a test run, there is usually a treatment that they want to win. It's very rare that someone is just like, let's see what happens. Either one of these could work. There's usually one that people are like, this is going to win. I believe this, or I want this, or like, we need to just test and prove that this is a better solution. Right.
You'll come into oftentimes it's driven by executive action, right? Where it's like, hey, we want to reduce, your job is to, win customers back or reduce churn or have a successful product launch. It's always tied to some sort of business outcome. And oftentimes
should be.
Yeah, should be. Right.
We'll get to that later too.
But what ends up happening a lot of the time is when you're testing something, it's kind of up to you. You're told as the channel person to, hey, make this a successful launch. And you're testing something where you're like, all right, I'm going to, run a test to support a product launch. And you obviously want that to go well. And it's tough when it doesn't. Like there are obviously ramifications to working on a campaign and testing between different things and wanting to show progress. And it's frustrating when that doesn't work. So
yeah, it absolutely is. And so I think that maybe this wasn't even the first thing. Maybe I should have started with some other stuff, but there'll be sub bullets to this. But in my opinion, when you're running a test, you aren't necessarily trying to find the perfect winning, quote unquote, winning variant right away. The first rounds of testing are identifying and confirming whether the variable you're testing is actually the lever that can move the needle for you.
Okay. Break that down for me a little bit. So first off, do you have an example?
Yeah, I think the best example is the Revel one that we were talking about the other day.
Yeah. So this is a crazy story. Tell the listeners the story.
So I think another thing you have to understand that I believe is that internally organizations will create a narrative or have a hypothesis and will not test it and just say it, and that will become fact even though it actually hasn't been tested or validated. So Revel, when I was there, when I first got there, right, it was mopeds. And so that in New York City in particular, that means in the winter months, no one's riding a moped. And so all your users that you acquired and engaged and retained from spring through, early fall, stop being users for a few months. And so that means that when it starts to become spring again, you have to sort of reacquire all those users all over again.
Yeah.
And so
I think a lot of seasonal businesses seasonal businesses that sell products
Absolutely.
that are
Yeah.
forest season are saying yes right now.
Yeah. 100%.
Yes, that is me. It sucks to try to get people back at the end of. I know you're selling swimwear every April. It's like, oh my God, here's the other slog. Now I have to convince people to buy beachwear from us again rather than somewhere else.
There are companies that ride or die on the holidays, right?
Oh yeah, holidays a huge
massive. And so there was, over time we retained a bunch of users from every year that would, of course, start riding in the spring. It was a really fun product. It was a great way to get around New York. It was way faster than calling a car or taking the subway in particular. Unlike walking or biking, A, it's faster. B, you don't show up pouring sweat in the New York City summers. Like, it was a great experience.
Yeah. And for people that don't live here, one weird thing about New York is it's really hard to get across Manhattan. It's also very hard to get from Brooklyn to Queens for various reasons, most of it related to the subway. Like, oftentimes if you have a job in Queens but you live in Brooklyn, you have to first go into Manhattan to catch a train back out to Queens. I think, is the G the only one that goes up between the two?
I think everything else you would have to some level, go back through Manhattan, back through a different neighborhood in Brooklyn over to Queens.
Yeah, or use the bus system in a weird way. Revel, biking and Revel, so being on two wheels effectively is the fastest way of oftentimes doing those. But again, as Sean said, like,
and most fun.
And most fun, 100%. Oftentimes when you're biking, you pour sweat, and so using a Revel was I think one of the best ways of getting across. Super fun.
So we would keep a bunch of users. Would obviously, we'd acquire 1 year. They'd go into the dormancy over the winter. They'd come back and start riding them again the next year. But there was every year a bunch of fall off of people who were acquired and then didn't resume riding the next spring. Over the years that before I got to Revel, there was, obviously that accumulated into a pretty large churn base. And kind of the thought that always came up, because a lot of the feedback we got from user surveys was around pricing. And so the working hypothesis, which had sort of become de facto fact, was that the number one blocker or number one cause of churn or lack of re-engagement the following year was around price. So we took that as our root hypothesis, that we wanted to go and prove or disprove that price was the primary lever, right? Because I think a lot of times we try and use testing to validate that a new treatment is better or a new feature is better, but it can also be a great way to actually identify the right problem area and then have that be what kicks off iteration and design and research, right? And so we were using this to say, okay, let's find out unequivocally if price is actually the biggest lever that will get these people back on the mopeds. And if it is, then we can go and figure out how can we make our pricing models that will be more attractive to these users. Is it going to be, there were a bunch of ideas on how we could do that, but right before we do all this work, let's just see.
Just so I understand, folks are obviously coming back for the spring and the summer after winter. You're trying to reacquire them. A lot of the reason that you want to run this test is to see if the thing that's stopping them from getting back on the mopeds is price. And so you want to run a large scale test focused on price to re-engage users that were previously dormant and hadn't been on the moped since like the last time the weather was nice.
Yeah. And some of them, a year between, like they missed an entire year since they had kind of churned. But that's exactly right. So had a really awesome boss at the time who kind of emphasized this point to me of like, if we go small here, if we don't go big enough here, people will second guess and say, well, the issue was you only gave 10% off or $10 off or one free ride or something like that. And so the incentive wasn't large enough. And so we should run this test again with a slightly larger one. And we're like, yeah, that would really suck to put all this work in, to do all this stuff, and then have the result be as we present it. You just didn't go big enough. So we're like, okay, so let's just remove that as an option. We are going to go so big that there is literally no way you can argue that our test proved or disproved this point. Because we're not trying to optimize. We are not trying to build a long-term, here's our win back or reactivation strategy. What we're trying to understand is this the single variable that will get a massive amount of people back on the bikes?
And this is oftentimes the thing that's important for startups is like, does this fundamental thesis that we have actually make sense? The thing that you're trying to do is figure out, all right, how is the way the world sees us? Not like, hey, is one product better than the other, but rather like, is this something foundational that we agree? In this case, price is the barrier. Is that actually, this is a really, really powerful thing to have the answer to.
Yeah, 100%. I don't really want to do another aside, but I'll do a quick aside. When I used to run testing at an e-commerce agency, if we didn't, when we kind of were starting getting up and running and kicking off a project with a new client, someone signs on for CRO, conversion rate optimization. They want results fast. They want to see tests in market fast, but you haven't really had time to do a whole bunch of research and a whole bunch of analysis yet. So the fastest way we could get tests up and start getting insights wasn't by building out a whole suite of hypotheses and like building out, then we have design and we have all these, you have to build out the alternate version. There's a lot of work that goes into running a test well. So what we would do is while we're doing our research and our batches of designs and our first bits of analysis, I would treat A/B tests, then just remove modules on the website. Don't change anything. I would either just reorder things or just completely delete a module from the homepage or from a key page. And so all we're trying to understand there is this module significantly impacting user behavior and purchase intent? And by starting there, that would help us say like, okay, we now know these 3 modules that we just removed and didn't really impact conversion rate aren't worth testing and optimizing for a while. But this one had a significant impact. And so this is where we're going to spend a bunch of time trying to get this one right, because that's going to have trickle-down effects. So same idea. So now we're at Revel debating about how do we go big enough. And it was like, okay, do we give them like 24 hours free? Do we, that's not really going to be buzzy enough. And so we went with, I can't remember the exact number. I'm pretty sure it was $100,000. Maybe it was 10,000, but it was a number that was outrageous. And so basically we were sending out the campaign and we were going to give you a fixed time in which to use those ride credits. But essentially you could ride just continuously for free for days.
Yeah. So you basically was the message just so I was a Revel user. So the pop-up notification that would come up on my phone, I never got one of these, which I'm upset about.
So it was an email, because if you weren't engaged, we were assuming you're not opening the app, right? And so
right.
It was an email with a subject line of like, let's say it's 100,000. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it was 10. Maybe it was 15. Really doesn't matter. The subject line was like $100,000 in ride credit through Sunday or something like that. And so you're gonna open that email. Like, let's be real.
Right.
If you get an email from a company you used to use their product a lot, and they said you have $100,000 for the next 3 days, you're gonna open it.
Yeah, and just to give some context, how much? I think the average ride, if you were to take like a 10, 15 minute ride, it was what, like $1 a minute, like 15? Is that right? Yeah. So it's a lot of money. Like $100,000 is not like every ride costs like $100. It's like, or even $1,000. Like it's a significant. Like it's basically free.
It's cheaper than riding an Uber or a Lyft, and so I mean, it was perpetual rental for a weekend if you wanted it. And the engagement was high enough. Like, right, I think there were so many people who just wanted to know, was this a typo, or like, was this a hack? It just seemed too crazy. And so I was telling Ibby before the call started, this was my first big campaign working with a mobile app. I did not anticipate such a high engagement rate from a churned user base, and so did not rate limit my message well enough. And so within like 3 minutes of sending the email, had crashed the app. The team had to get up and like spin up more servers to support all the traffic we were driving, because everyone was just blown away and thought this was some sort of joke, and it was not. But what we found was that like certainly some people rode, right? But not nearly as many as you would think took advantage of this thing. And so we were able to say, listen, like it doesn't matter what size promotion we give to these folks. They're not coming back to ride mopeds anymore. Whether maybe they moved, maybe who knows what happened, right? Maybe they bought a car. But we can stop trying to figure out the right promotion to get people back on a moped because we gave them unlimited free money and they didn't do it.
What do you do as a marketer from there? Like, is it okay, we're going to just try to not re-engage customers again and just focus on optimizing the ones that we have? What decisions do you make after that? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Yes. I mean, so then you go into like research mode, right? Like because this hypothesis had been just thrown around without data for long enough that it was kind of like assumed to be true. We now basically had just proven that the facts of the world as we knew them were incorrect. And so we had to come up with alternate cases for reality and why this was happening. And so we went on a big streak of user research, talking to churned users, talking to active users, talking to at-risk users. We started looking back historically to try and figure out what were the indicators of the groups that did end up churning, or the cohorts and the riders that ended up churning versus the ones that came back. Were there things we could do to proactively identify them? And then, some of the other things we've talked about, like we had, and I guess it hasn't been released yet, but by the time you are hearing this, you will have probably heard the other one. The idea of what are you doing between purchases is that is the key to life cycle marketing. Is how do you engage your users when they're not in a buying cycle? And so we spent a lot of time thinking about like what can we do during the non-moped season. And luckily, I was getting there right when we were launching the cars. So we did already have a solution that we were launching with, where you could ride our, instead of riding a Lyft or an Uber, you could ride a Revel. And they were all Teslas at the time. So it was just a really sick experience. And so we got a ton of engagement on that. And I think that massively helped. But we spent a ton of time researching and reviewing data and trying to figure out what else could we do? What were the levers that we could pull? But we knew that price wasn't one of them, or wasn't the one that was worth spending time on.
Right. And I think I'm going to say this explicitly. Of the Sean Collins pillars of successful marketing, we hit on the first one, which is effectively leave no room for second guessing. That is a massive test to run. You are like, all right, what is the most... I think your LinkedIn profile says something that I really love, which is, what would we do? How would we do this if we were insane?
Yeah, I think it's how would we do this if we were crazy? Yeah.
Yeah, how would we do this if we were crazy? I think that's like a very good statement here, which is like, leave no room for second guessing. Like, there's only one answer to this, which is possible. And I think it hits on another pillar too, is like, I assume that there's some confounding variables that you, like, did you guys analyze anything else when, like, obviously price was the first thing. Did it give you any other insights after running further analyses that you might not have had? Oh yeah, you actually said this, right? Like, you guys ended up focusing on product education afterward and improving those metrics. But I think
we redid our onboarding, as a result of the research we did. We did some really fun things that I've carried on thinking are great tactics. So I actually, in the onboarding, I sent an email, and the reply to went directly to my inbox. And so it was just a plain text email. I said, I'm your ride concierge or something like that, and genuinely would get a couple dozen responses a day, and I would personally respond to them, and we'd just start conversations. And I would do everything I could to make sure they got set up for success. But I got to hear all the questions, all the concerns that they had from them, and so that was, to me, one of the most insightful. Like, user research is phenomenal, but user research, when someone knows they're on a panel or knows that they're being interviewed, is not as just like raw and honest as someone talking to support. And so I think that's where you should try and turn your support teams into insight centers. And you should look for touch points where you can just interact with your users or your customers as often as possible in the least formal way possible.
Yeah, I think talking to users, understanding what they're talking about. Like we've heard this time and time again, both from, I think the most recent podcast that I can go back to, and I'm going to show the podcast again, is Rebecca's episode. I think it was episode 5. She goes through and talks about how a lot of what they do at Coterie is look at what the actual interactions are coming in from the customers and figure out, hey, how can we open up a dialogue, both to fix the problem. Obviously, you want to make sure that they're like fixing the problem, but also to like just gather a state of the world. How does this, how is our business actually running? How are our users actually working? It's very easy. Like for the business that I run, like we don't have thousands of customers. And so I can have a personal relationship with each. I know how often they're logging on. I know what they're using it for. I know their use case. I know how to get them successful on it. But if you're running a business that's talking to, tens of thousands, millions of users, it's very, very difficult to try to figure out, how is any one of them, or how is even a group of them feeling about the product at any given point? What are their pain points? And so that's a super cool way of doing it, right? Where it's you take this approach where you message them, you say, hey, like I'm here for you. This mailbox is actually manned by a real human being, and I will do my job to fix that. Obviously, like if you're running Instagram or something and you get tens of bajillions of messages after that, like it doesn't work for all scales of businesses, but I would say it works for most scales of businesses.
Yeah, and there's ways you can slim it down, right? Like this is the 21st century. You can have an email that goes to 1% or 0.5% of your users. You don't need to have it go to every single person, but you can figure out key inflection points or key moments where you want to have a chance to talk to someone at this point in time, or who just did X action or who hasn't done Y action, and set up a message. Or you could just also do it way less automated and just send someone an email from your Gmail or, your work Gmail. I guess maybe you have a work Outlook or something too, but let's just be real. You have a work Gmail if you're listening to this podcast. So just send them an email. Like, why not? What's the worst that happens? Someone doesn't answer you?
Yeah, I think a lot of times we've talked about this a lot, and a lot of folks that work in marketing, there's always this like search for perfection. I think action is always better than inaction. Where if you're, what's the perfect email that we can send? How do we like write this the right way? How do we do this? And obviously, if you're working for a gigantic company that has millions of eyes on it, this you probably should focus that way. But for, again, most businesses, test quickly, figure out what answer you want, and look at, hey, like how do I get the answer to this question in the best and the fastest way possible, and how do I make sure that the answer isn't being confounded by some extra variable, right? Like it's not due to some external reason. Like how do I test the single thing that I'm trying to answer and get the answer to it?
So I think that's like the perfect segue into point 2. When you're running a test, you need to define what you're trying to optimize for, but you also need to analyze against other metrics as well, because things can have second and third order effects. They could affect something, have an effect you didn't expect it to have. So I'm going to give another example. This one I'm going to be a little less detailed on because we're still running some tests around it. But at Bilt, there's an engagement metric that we wanted to improve. We had a few hypotheses on what might be causing it to be not exactly where we wanted it to be. So we put together a few different treatments, and even within kind of this one treatment kind of concept, we came up with a couple variants of it, with different incentive bonus structures. So again, we were trying to get one particular metric to move. We ran the tests, and there were 2 that were far and away the best. The one that moved that original metric the most actually didn't have great long-term effects. So it gave us a short-term win with a long-term return to normalcy. And so basically we like had a temporary blip of success with a high cost to us. And the second best one moved the needle on the primary metric, not quite as well as that first one, but it had long-term positive implications on long-term engagement. And so even though it didn't quote unquote win against the metric we were trying to optimize for, which is this one engagement point, it was far and away the better variant because it cost us less. It had a positive impact on the primary metric, and it had a long-term positive impact on the primary metric as opposed to a very, very short-term one.
So you guys chose the long term. You guys chose a long term effect over the short term effect. Is that mainly driven by, how do you analyze? Like, I assume that you're just looking at the financial reward of that one, right? Where it's like, hey, like we just make more money in the long term. Like even though we reacquire, 75% of the customers, let's say it's a reacquisition campaign, because this is what's been going on in my brain recently. We reacquire 75% of the customers in test B compared to test A. However, those customers end up staying for like twice as long. Ergo, the net dollar amount that we make from that overall campaign is higher.
I think that's one way of looking at it, right? So, I think that's a pretty e-commerce looking way to think to be focused on, right? Because let's go with that. Maybe the margin's higher because maybe you had short-term wins, but it was a huge discount, and so you barely made any margin on any of these sales. Or maybe it ended up cannibalizing future sales, right? These could be people who were going to come back, and you had a great promo, so it made them buy faster. But really, that just means that the purchase they were going to do in a month at full price is now gone. And now it's going to be a longer period of time because their standard use time was going to be once a month. They actually bought a little early. So now their next purchase is going to be for 45 days or whatever, right? So there can be deleterious effects on the long-term side if you just optimize for a single short-term win.
I've worked at companies. It's kind of interesting. Sometimes companies will choose the short to boost the short-term effect as opposed to the long-term effect. If you go back and listen to the Rome episode, he gives the example of how a lot of e-commerce brands will try to acquire a cohort of customers at a much cheaper CAC. So CAC is customer acquisition cost. When you run a campaign, you want to make sure that like the amount of money that you make from that if it costs me $1,000 to run a campaign and 1,000 people convert, then my customer acquisition cost around that time period is $1 per customer effectively. And what you want to do is you want to make that effective. You want to make sure that you acquire as many customers for as little value as possible, as little dollars as possible. But oftentimes what ends up happening is if you acquire customers and try to do things to reduce CAC, those customers are not good for you in the long term. And you end up making less value from those customers in the long term. But oftentimes companies will make that choice on purpose. A good example is if you're a public company. I've worked for companies where they're public and there's obviously whatever you can do toward the end of the quarter to boost your numbers in any capacity, even though it might not be the best for your business's long-term health. If you want to, show, if you want to either minimize your losses or get customers to come back and increase MAU or DAUs, MAUs, sometimes people will just take if option A is in the long term worse than option B, but in the short term it's better, they'll still choose option A. And there's actually a perfectly I don't know.
There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's other things too, right? Like A, you need to show growth. And that's fine. That's just the way the world works. B, you can talk about like halo effects, right? Like if it's an e-commerce product or something that people can wear or will post about or showcase or tell their friends about, having more of your product out there, depending on your strategy. If you're a luxe brand, maybe you don't want more out because that sort of devalues the exclusivity. But generally speaking, more brand awareness is good. And so getting tons of people wearing your shirt or having everyone be like opening your app or something like that can be a good thing. You could say that, hey, we're going to acquire a ton of one-time or one-time purchasers or short-time users, or people who are only going to be on the free program and never convert to the paid subscription. But in that cohort, there's still going to be people who are repeat purchasers. There's going to be people who do upgrade. And you could also say like, hey, now we're getting insights. We're getting more data to understand who does retain versus who doesn't. We're putting the opportunity in the hands of our lifecycle team, or in the hands of our email team, or in the hands of our product team. And we're optimistic that we'll be able to get more people to stay or use our product or repeat purchase, because we think we're getting better and smarter, and now we have bigger test audiences and all that. So there's other reasons to do it too. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but
no, that's super. I mean, going back to the original point, that makes a ton of sense. You got to focus on more than just one metric. You got to look at all of the effects that might come from the test that you're running. This is good. We had 3 more things that we wanted to talk about, but we are coming close to an hour. Do we want to?
Let's do 2 more, because I think.
Let's do 2 more.
I think that this next one's pretty quick. I think you need to revisit test cohorts for the same reason that we just talked about of looking at other metrics to understand kind of the full impact. You should revisit the lifetime value, the engagement, the purchasing behavior, maybe 3 months, 6 months, a year after a test is completed, and compare that against the other treatment or the control or whatever, because that just gives you another look at what the actual long-term effects are. And that does get very complicated, right? Like, because if you're testing a lot now, they've been exposed to a whole bunch of different tests. But if you're, depending on how you're doing your audience selection, hopefully that's pretty well spread across. So each original cohort from a past test has a bunch of different tests evenly spread across the audience. But I mean, that's why you do hire data experts and don't just use like a basic, ESP's random 50% sampling, and you actually build audiences and do things in a controlled and disciplined manner. But look at the long-term effects, because they can surprise you.
You can't, I don't think there's a way of in going back to your previous scenario, there's no way to look at you have to go back to those people and understand long-term engagement, right? Like, if you want
Otherwise, what are you doing?
Yeah. Your business is just going to if you don't do this, you're just going to, going back to Rome's CAC to LTV, trying to acquire customers at a low CAC, you have to figure out how those customers do in the long term, because it might just generally be, oh, wow, like, yes, we acquired these customers at a lower amount, but we got absolutely screwed when we looked at their long-term effects. Like, we made a lower amount of money.
Yeah. And there's a professor at Wharton, who's like a data science guy, but all about marketing. And he's all about LTV, Peter Fader. And he's written a bunch of books on this. But he says, like, your retention curve is going to level off. And so you do need to constantly be getting new customers. However, and a lot of those aren't ever going to repeat, especially if you look at e-com, right? Like a solid repeat purchase rate in e-com is 30%, 40%. So that means inherently 60 to 70% of people are one-time customers. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't beat yourself up over that. But that does give you key insights into like how much you can spend, because you have to account for the fact that 70% of your customers aren't ever going to buy more than once. And so you can't be banking on multiple purchases to cover your CAC. And so I think it's important to look at the long-term effects and to account for the fact that, like some people will have an LTV that is, or a lifetime even, that is 3 years, 5 years, but most of your customers are going to have a one purchase customer lifetime.
And you're always going to have, you're always going to have that 60%. How do you optimize the 30% that will, keep purchasing from you again? How do you make that experience great for them? How do you make the experience great for everyone? But specifically, how do you find the group that performs well? And how do you extend from them? Anyway,
All right, last one, because this isn't even like that smart. This is just something that annoys me. And so maybe people don't even need to listen to this, but
No. Do it. Things that annoy you often make good conversation. So
as an email is my primary channel. That's the one that I am passionate about. Everyone loves to say, we can just test it. It'll be easy to test that. Like, yeah, theoretically, it is easy to create a different variant of an email with a different subject line or a different body copy or something like that. That's not hard. Sure, we can totally just test that. However, I get very annoyed because I don't think that most of those should count as tests. You aren't coming in with a real hypothesis. One single email is not representative of that change, right? So like if you test 2 different subject lines, even if you come in with a hypothesis saying like, we're going to see what happens if we include a name or the exact same subject line without their first name. Okay, you have a hypothesis that including a name in a subject line will get more opens. Great. Sending that one time is not representative of that effect. It is a moment in time to a bunch of people. Could be a bad day. What's going on in the world? How recently have they purchased, right? Like, did you even do the due diligence to like have statistically similar audiences and representative audiences on the A and B version? And so I get very, very annoyed at the let's just test it methodology. And so I get just even at the idea of calling that a test, that annoys me quite a bit.
Yeah. I mean,
I have no problem with you doing different subject lines, especially if you're doing it like, hey, we're going to have 4 subject lines and we're going to let the AI in the ESP, I hate having 2 acronyms back to back. We're going to let the AI in the ESP decide the winning subject line after 30% of the sends, and then the remaining 70% will get the one that had the best engagement. Great. No problem with that whatsoever, but let's not call that testing because you're not learning anything. You're just putting out different variants and trying to get the most opens. Nothing wrong with that. Just don't say we're testing.
No, that's a good one. That is, I mean, at that point, you're just like, what's it fair to call that? Is that like optimizing variance?
Yeah, we probably do need a better name for that. Because why not do that, right? Like you have the tooling, otherwise you're just guessing that one is better. And so why not take a couple swings at it?
If you're trying to figure out, rather than the thing that you're trying to figure out is like, all right, if you're sending an email trying to get folks to buy trying to get people to buy pants, you're Gap. And you're trying to figure out like is it fair to say that an experiment would be, what performs better in the summertime, sending a message about, hey, here is some new swimwear, or which performs better, right? Like my hypothesis would be swimwear performs better than athleisure in the summertime. And that like counts as an actual experiment versus when you actually know that a swimwear performs better than that athleisure, like you're then trying to optimize and eke as much value out of that as possible. And that's sort of the optimization of the variance. Is that correct? Or am I wrong there?
I think you're right. I mean, I think that generally speaking, I would say, hey, we don't need to test that. We could just look at past sales data and see. I think there's other ways you can get that information. And so why waste a testing opportunity on something that you can get an answer through just data analysis? But that is a better test of like, okay, we are going to have 2 groups that are statistically similar audiences. And for a period of time, we are going to primarily talk about swimwear to one group, primarily talk about athleisure to another group. And we're going to see the short-term sales effects and long-term sales effects on these people. And we will use that to inform the following year's marketing strategy. I think that's completely valid.
Everyone, thanks so much for listening. Let us know if you like this format. We're very, very curious to get your feedback. The number of you that, listened to the entire episode.
If you have thoughts, questions, if you want to be on the podcast, if you have someone you want us to reach out to be on the podcast, you can email me at sean@numbersandnarratives.co.
And I'm Ibby at numbersandnarratives.co. All right, thanks everyone for listening.